Welcome back, and thank you for joining us here at the FinCEN Report. I am Jonathan Wilson. I'm one of the co-founders of the FinCEN Report company, and here on the FinCEN Report podcast, we talk about FinCEN, the Corporate Transparency Act, anti-money laundering compliance, and all of those related issues. So thank you for joining us today. Later on in our broadcast, we're going to talk to Atlanta attorney Bryan Jacoutot. Bryan is a lawyer who has written a white paper about cryptocurrency and how it gets analyzed under the U.S. Securities Act. And we're going to talk about cryptocurrency from an anti-money laundering point of view and some of the things that FinCEN is doing to regulate cryptocurrency and to get involved in wrapping their arms around that developing issue. But for now, as an introduction, I want to talk to you about the rules that FinCEN adopted just a month ago to implement the Corporate Transparency Act. And in particular, I want you to know about 5 important things about those new rules. Number 1, January 1, 2024. This is the key implementation date for FinCEN's new rules. No one needs to file anything before January 1, 2024, but on that date, which we'll call the implementation date, everything is going to change. When do you need to file? Well, if your company exists on the implementation date, January 1 of 2024, you are going to have 1 year from then to get your first report filed. Anywhere up to December 31, 2024, you are timely, you are good to go. But any company that is formed after the implementation date will have only 30 calendar days to get their first report filed. This is going to dramatically change the way we form corporations, LLCs, and limited partnerships, because it means that we really can't get started. We can't file our articles of organization until we have all the data collected so that we're able to timely file that first beneficial ownership report. Number 3, third thing that you need to know about the Corporate Transparency Act is the required information. In that beneficial ownership report that gets filed, whenever it is due, there are 5 pieces of data the company needs to report for every beneficial owner. And that is full legal name, residential address, date of birth, a unique identifying number, which could be a driver's license, a passport number, or one of a few other approved forms of ID. And then 5th is an image file of the document that contains the unique ID that just got filed for item number 4. So those are your 5 pieces of mandatory information that every beneficial owner will need to include in the beneficial ownership report when it is due. Number 4, the 4th thing that you need to know is the 30-day amendment rule. As we had expected from the draft regulations that FinCEN did about a year ago, after an initial beneficial ownership report is filed, the reporting company has only 30 calendar days in which to file an amendment after any item of previously reported data changes. So imagine your company has successfully filed its first report. You've got the full legal name, date of birth, residential address, unique identifying number, and image file for every one of your beneficial owners. And then one of those beneficial owners changes their home address, or perhaps they have a new driver's license, so the driver's license number or the image file has changed. In any one of those instances, a 30-day clock is now running by which the reporting company needs to get its amendment on file in order to be timely. Number 5, the 5th thing that you need to know about FinCEN's new rules are the penalties. As we expected, there is a $500 per day fine for every day that a reporting company is late, whether it has to do with filing the initial report or filing an amendment. Every day of lateness is $500 in fines, up to a maximum fine of $10,000. That is the reason why every reporting company needs to have a robust process to keep track of the data covered by its reports and any changes in those data so that it can have a timely amendment within the 30-day rule. As before, an intentional misfiling or a willful failure to file or a willful filing of inaccurate information is still punishable as a felony. FinCEN has the ability to prosecute individuals, and the potential penalty can be up to 2 years of imprisonment for a willful failure to file or a willful filing of inaccurate information. Corporate Transparency Act compliance is going to be very important, and we encourage reporting companies to explore the FinCEN Report Companies filing service to use that robust filing system that includes automatic updates on changes in data in order to help them comply. Corporate Transparency Act compliance is going to be very important, and we encourage reporting companies to explore the FinCEN Report Company's filing service to use that robust filing system that includes automatic updates on changes in data in order to help them comply. Now, I want to introduce you to Bryan Jacoutot, and we're going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency and its relationship to anti-money laundering compliance. As I mentioned, I'm here with Bryan Jacoutot. Bryan is an attorney with the Atlanta law firm of Taylor English Duma, and has recently written a white paper analyzing the securities law aspects of cryptocurrency. And we thought it would be a great idea to have him on the show to talk about cryptocurrency as it relates to FinCEN and money laundering. So Bryan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So tell us a little bit about your white paper. What really is the issue involving cryptocurrency and securities laws?
In my practice, I started getting a lot of questions from individuals, clients, potential clients, all on the same lines that were starting these cryptocurrencies, saying, "Is my token a security?" Or "How can I launch this token without it being considered a security?" And this is obviously a very individualized question, and it requires an individual analysis every time. But what I endeavored to do with the white paper, the research article, was essentially aggregate all the information that I've acquired over the years and develop a generalized working framework for analysis of tokens.
Yeah, and for those who aren't familiar with the issue, why would the author of a cryptocurrency care whether it was treated legally as a security or not? What's the big difference?
Yeah, well, so the securities designation, along with that would come a lot of reporting obligations and disclosure obligations. Sometimes these are very expensive, and oftentimes you need to develop somewhat of a compliance department internally to deal with it. So if you're not considered security, you have a lot more leeway and can be a lot more free with how you orient your company, or your cryptocurrency. But if you are designated security, these obligations, reporting and disclosure or otherwise, come into play. And it's something that anyone who's starting cryptocurrency needs to consider before they do so.
With that background, how can you tell whether a particular cryptocurrency is a security or not?
Right now, the test being used by the SEC and by most courts who've considered this issue is something relatively famous in the securities environment, but probably most people don't know. It's called the Howey test, and it is an interpretation by a Supreme Court of what an investment contract is under the SEC regulation. Now, there's a couple of statutes that are involved there, but we can just kind of use the umbrella term SEC statutes. But that's what the Supreme Court came up with in the 40s, and they still apply it to this day because it doesn't particularly matter, what type of instrument you're using. Technology, the test has developed along with the technological advancements.
The Howey case was something we all learned in securities law class in law school. And I'm sure I'm going to get them all wrong, but they're like, what, 3 or 4 elements of the security under the Howey test? Can you remind our audience what the elements are?
Sure. The courts look to whether there was an investment of money with an expectation of profit in a common enterprise, and the profit that you are expecting is derived primarily from the efforts of others. So there's 4 factors there. With those 4 factors, that's how you will analyze essentially, in this point in time, that's how you will analyze essentially every cryptocurrency offering. And so that's what companies or individuals who are starting cryptocurrencies or hope to fold them into their business model, that's what they have to be on the lookout for.
Can you apply the Howey test to some popular cryptocurrencies and tell us, which ones are securities and which ones aren't?
I think the easiest way to take a more like a generalized approach is to use Bitcoin as our standard bearer, because it was the first cryptocurrency, and it has really survived scrutiny under the Howey test because of its origin story, the way it was launched, and the way it operates. So, remember, keeping the backdrop of those 4 factors in mind, I look at Bitcoin and I say, what makes it not a security? And for me, there's 4 factors of Bitcoin that make it unlikely to be considered security by the SEC. And that's the way it was launched, which is something I call the fair launch, because there was no pool of initial tokens that were granted or gifted to insiders or project founders or initial investors. that stands in direct contrast to most cryptocurrencies, whether it's Ethereum or Ripple, which uses the XRP cryptocurrency, or really any other. They all did what's called a pre-mine. And a pre-mine is essentially where tokens are initially set aside for sale in order to help bootstrap the project. Bitcoin didn't have this bootstrapping aspect because really there was no value. And that brings us to a second thing that's very important to avoid securities designation.
Right, but before you move to the second test, so the first aspect of the Howey test was that there was an exchange of money. And so is it the pre-mining that is indicative of an exchange of money that tags the first prong of the Howey test?
Yeah, I think it tags the first, second, really third prong. And honestly, it really incorporates all four, because it's not just an exchange of money. You're obviously you're spending that money with the expectation of profits. That's why you're buying a cryptocurrency that has no use or has no real market yet, no liquidity. So you hit the first two, then you have, is this in a common enterprise? Well, sure. If there was a enterprise or individual or group that was the people who actually created the pre-mine, created the pool of tokens, then there's your common enterprise. And that also pulls into that fourth factor, which is the profits are derived primarily from the efforts of others. That group that did the pre-mine is also likely to be the group that supports the token infrastructure going forward. In fact, that's often why they do the pre-mine, because it allows them to raise this initial capital to bootstrap the project and get developers and machines and things like that.
And as I remember the Howey test, it was based on this man, Howey, who had a bunch of orange orchards in Florida. This was back in the 40s, and tourists would come down and he would give them a tour of his orchards. It was kind of a novelty then. And a lot of them were wealthy. And he would say, oh, would you like a piece of the enterprise? Well, what I'll do is I'll lease you an acre of my orchard, but don't worry, you don't have to come down to Florida and actually pick the oranges yourself. I have my own picking and orange juice squeezing company. So I will lease to you the land. And then I'm also going to pick the oranges. I'm going to squeeze the oranges. I'm going to turn it into orange juice. I'm going to sell the orange juice. And then if we have a profit, I'm going to give you your cut. That's the common enterprise aspect of the Howey test. So again, applying this to cryptocurrency, how does Bitcoin not have a common enterprise, but some other cryptocurrencies do?
Sure. One of the differentiating factors for Bitcoin is it's really difficult, if not impossible, to identify any sort of leadership team. While there was a founder of Bitcoin, it was this pseudonymous creator named Satoshi Nakamoto. We, to this day, still don't know who it is. Has not contributed anything to the project in over a decade. So they're gone. And what remains essentially voluntary users who come in and out at their own free will and accord to the extent that they want to participate. And they participate, and sometimes they'll make some Bitcoin in the process through mining or something like that. Or maybe they're building a business around Bitcoin, but they're not in control in any way, shape, or form of the enterprise, if you want to call it that. And that stands, again, in contrast to, let's say, well, I hate to keep picking on Ripple, but they just happen to be in the news right now. Ripple is a company, it's Ripple Inc. And they have a CEO, they have a leadership team, they distributed millions of XRP, both through initial sales, investments, tight investments among venture capital folks. And then they also paid their employees with this currency, saying essentially, don't worry, it'll get more valuable, and then you'll have a big windfall on your hands. And that creates that common enterprise. And then on top of that, they're also building out all of the utility and use cases for XRP to the extent there are any. They're the ones who are responsible for it. And they're also pitching that to the people they're selling the XRP to initially, saying, look, we're going to work on this. We're going to build it out. And eventually we're going to find this great use case that's going to make the XRP rise in value. And you'll be happy you gave us your money today because it's going to be worth more tomorrow. It's sort of definitionally an expectation of profit derived from the efforts of others.
Gotcha. So applying the Howey test, in the Howey case, it was Mr. Howey picking the oranges, creating the orange juice, selling the orange juice, and then remitting a share of the profits back to the investor. That's what made Howey a security. You're saying in the case of those cryptocurrencies where there's a founder team or a management team that's doing something with the cryptocurrency that thereby makes it more valuable, it's that ongoing efforts of some group somewhere that causes the token to become a security under the Howey test as we understand it.
at least it makes it more likely to be a security. Maybe not in and of itself, but it's one of those, holistic elements that the SEC and courts look to. And to make sure we're not staying only on one side of the fence, the counter argument to that is, well, we may provide a lot of influence, but we don't control this. You don't have stock in our company. If the company raises in value, but XRP doesn't, you don't get the value in Ripple. They'll say essentially that's the difference. And they may be right. Well, we're going to see what the courts say. But the exciting thing about the Ripple case is Ripple's XRP sale was very lucrative. So they have a lot of resources, and they're likely to take it all the way through to the end, possibly even to an appeal stage. So one of the things the cryptocurrency industry has been waiting for is clarity. And a big reason why there haven't been a lot of clarity is because most people have settled and we haven't gotten any great case law out of it. But this case will likely establish that. And if my framework is more in line with the SEC's, but the alternative and counter argument to that is, well, hey, we're disassociated enough that this isn't really an investment contract in a company. It's just a token that you can use our platform, and it may or may not increase in value.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the case. Which specific case, in case people wanted to go out and find it? But which case are we talking about?
Yeah, I don't have the exact citation on me, but it should be just SEC versus Ripple Labs, I think is what it's called.
And that's in federal court?
It's in the Southern District of New York. Yeah, federal court. Federal
court in New York. And what stage of litigation are we at? Is there a trial coming up, or is there some sort of a pre-trial summary judgment motion that might, establish the precedent that would indicate which way the law is going to go?
Yeah, so we're at the summary judgment phase. Both parties, the SEC and Ripple, have filed cross motions for summary judgment on their own behalves. So they have not replied yet on either of those. So we just have the summary judgment motions, but the replies, I think, are due very soon. So that'll come down the pike, and we'll get some more information about their arguments and counter arguments. But the thing about these cases is they're often able to be resolved at summary judgment, and trial's not necessarily something that happens all that often. So the summary judgment phase could decide the litigation.
So, for example, that federal court in New York might say, we're adopting the viewpoint of the SEC. Ripple is a security because of how we apply the Howey test. And then that order of the court on the motion for summary judgment would basically be a new precedent that other cryptocurrencies would look to in analyzing whether or not they need to think of themselves as a security.
Absolutely. And I think it would be, it's going to be whichever way the court comes down, it'll be a welcome development for the industry, because it'll really give some clarity to what, to be clear, the SEC, I think, has really come down on the same side of this for a while. They've been fairly clear, but the question is the SEC's interpretation correct? So it's making its way through the courts, and we're going to find out whether the SDN, the Southern District of New York, thinks it's correct. And then I anticipate, regardless of what happens, there's going to probably be an appeal, because there's a lot of money involved here, and a lot of interest. And as I said, since the industry's watching, I guarantee you'll find an appeal regardless of how it goes down. So we'll really get some good clarity as it makes its way through the appeal process.
Okay. So when you compare Ripple to many of the other popular cryptocurrencies, are they all relatively the same? Are there any major differences, so that if, for example, Ripple lost in the Southern District of New York, and even after the appeal, the ruling stood that Ripple was a security, and therefore a lot of the distribution of Ripple before then is arguably illegal or invalid. Are there other popular cryptocurrencies today that are sufficiently different from Ripple that they might still survive under a theory that they were not a security?
I think there's 21,000 give or take cryptocurrencies right now, so it's difficult to get a beat on all of them. To paint with a broad brush, though, a lot of them have used this track record, because the speculative fervor around cryptocurrencies that's existed for the last 5 to 7 years or so, kind of in popular culture, it makes it very enticing to do this type of launch, where you can say, hey, we've got a great idea, here's our new token, you can buy it, and then they can use that money to bootstrap the project and really work on it. So a lot of people sort of fell prey, but they were enticed by that option, and they did it. I don't know of any off the top of my head that did the kind of deliberative approach that Bitcoin did, where it just released 50 Bitcoin at a time through its proof of work mining process for hour after hour, day after day, and slowly just let it seep into the ecosystem. It's very difficult to do that, and I don't know if any that have done that. But on the other hand, even if the SEC comes down this way on Ripple, cryptocurrencies that are maybe very decentralized in, to say that there's not really a leadership team, maybe you could argue Ethereum is along those lines. But at the same time, Ethereum certainly has leaders, and so the SEC may not even find them to be outside the securities law apparatus. So that's a long answer to basically saying I think probably most cryptocurrencies will be affected by that ruling.
In my practice, I see it come up a lot in different fintech businesses that have a wide variety of different creative approaches, but a lot of them involve taking in cryptocurrency, doing something with it, and then facilitating some other kind of transaction. And one of the legal issues that we guard against is whether the taking in, the ingesting, and the holding of the cryptocurrency on behalf of a customer or client constitutes what securities lawyers call effecting a transaction in securities. So, for example, if you bought some stock from IBM on the stock exchange, you gave that stock to me, and then I held it for you, and at your request, I sold it to others and collected the cash on your behalf. The SEC would say I'm effecting a securities transaction, and therefore I'm acting like a broker dealer, and therefore I need to have a broker dealer license. So if cryptocurrency is a security and you're giving me your Bitcoin and we're doing something with it, now arguably I'm acting like a broker dealer.
I agree with that. And one of the interesting things about the technology used for cryptocurrency is a lot of that process can maybe be automated. You can also orient the custodial nature of the transaction, where instead of you're just holding it and it's clearly in your custody alone, perhaps through a multi-signature, something that's called a multi-signature wallet, essentially allows you to have multiple people own keys that can distribute the token. So is it necessarily in your custody, or is it perhaps in your clients and your custody? And how do you determine who's affected by that broker dealer registration requirement, or maybe nobody is? So the technology allows for interesting little ways around maybe some of the regulatory burden. But again, just like the securities designation itself, it remains unclear, and it's a difficult place to navigate. And entrepreneurs and lawyers in the space, they've got their work cut out for them.
Sure. And since this is the FinCEN report, we have to talk a little bit about how this applies to FinCEN. In the fintech space, again, taking this analogy another step, if you are a securities broker dealer taking in securities and buying and selling them on behalf of a client, you're governed by the Securities Exchange Act and the Investment Advisors Act and the broker dealer regulations, and all of those include an element of anti-money laundering compliance. Banks, for example, under the Bank Secrecy Act, have to have an anti-money laundering compliance policy, and that's governed by FinCEN, and that's how we guard against money laundering. In the crypto space, where we still at the moment have the ability to argue that most of these cryptocurrencies might not be securities, a lot of the fintech players have taken the position that, well, I'm not a broker dealer because I'm not dealing in securities. I'm not a bank. I don't have a bank charter, and I don't need to be regulated by FinCEN as a money service business or a money transmitting business because I'm not transmitting money. I'm just dealing in cryptocurrencies, which are not cash, nor are they securities. If the case against Ripple turns out to basically support the SEC position, so that Ripple is a security and therefore many other cryptocurrencies probably are also securities, is that going to pull a lot of these fintech players even closer in line with what FinCEN wants, which is to have them all regulated as money service businesses, so that they're all going to have to adopt anti-money laundering compliance programs?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that the once it starts really getting folded into the traditional regulatory scheme that we have, through whether it's through that securities designation or some other way, I think you're going to start to see a lot of compliance obligations on these cryptocurrency, whether it's a wallet provider, the actual cryptocurrency itself, or the foundation that supports it. But the interesting thing too is that in technology, we have something called a DDoS attack. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the distributed denial of service, where people basically hit a website over and over again until it crashes. As I mentioned before, there's 21,000 plus cryptocurrencies right now. a week ago there was a little bit less, and a week from now there'll probably be more. And it is somewhat of a DDoS attack on the regulatory apparatus, because these things are continually popping up based data all around the world. And I do not envy the regulators' task in trying to corral all of them. And I think that's probably why you see such an earnest job by the SEC going after a company like Ripple, because they're going to want to throw the book at someone and set an example, essentially, to hopefully hinder this lack of compliance. But we'll see, because I think this technology is it can spring up from anywhere, and that's part of its charm, I guess, and part of its use. And it's a regulatory headache, I'm sure.
Sure. And if you think about the Howey test, dealing with this circumstance in the 1940s where someone has an orange orchard, and it's been good law now for almost 80 years, we very well might get a similar sort of an outcome in the Ripple case that could stand for a very long time as well. Apart from the SEC approach, are there any other novel approaches out there for dealing with cryptocurrency and the problem of money laundering? Because all of us in the AML space know that money laundering, it sounds sort of anodyne and academic, but it really is a very powerful force for evil in the world. Whether you're transmitting illegal drugs or illegal weapons or trafficking in human persons, all of the cash flows that make those illegal activities valuable, that cash has to go somewhere, and you can't put it into the legitimate money system, then pay taxes on it, or without letting government know the illegal stuff that you're engaged in. And that's the heart of money laundering. So cryptocurrency, because it's skirting at the edges of regulation, is really the lifeblood of choice for a lot of seriously bad organizations that are money laundering. If we don't regulate cryptocurrency somehow through traditional FinCEN guided anti-money laundering compliance, how should we be regulating cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I think the money laundering angle is legitimate for sure. But one of the things about cryptocurrency is particularly blockchain technology, is that the ledgers are distributed, but they're also publicly available. There's a veneer of sort of cryptography that masks maybe IP addresses and direct identities, but the way most people interact with the ecosystem now are through these already regulated on-ramps, whether it's a Coinbase or a Kraken or any other type of exchange. The regulators are targeting those on and off ramps where people sell, pay dollars for Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever.
When you say the on-ramp and the off-ramp, that's where you exchange a token for cash.
Yeah,
dollars, pounds, euros. Yeah, that's the on-ramp and the off-ramp. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and it's just to say that's where they're I think finding their regulatory niche, because Coinbase is a great example. They are a publicly traded company now. They're about as regulated as you can get. They have millions of customers that trade in dollars and all these other crypto tokens all the time, and they throw in these KYC requirements and the AML requirements at that juncture. And that really, once you get tagged with the KYC from Coinbase, because the ledger is distributed and public, you can really track that and follow that. So it's not as nefarious, I think, as it's been made out to be, and shadowy, I suppose. It's not as shadowy as it's been made out to be. And I think regulators are going to be fine to do their traditional jobs of AML and KYC compliance. And I just want to be sure that we don't regulate cryptocurrency for the sake of regulating it, but for making sure we, for any other reason, to curb bad behavior or undesirable behavior, but don't just over-regulate it out of existence because it's a little difficult to understand, or it's a new thing and then people are afraid of it. I think if we take a responsible regulatory approach to this, you're able to get that innovation and also maintain the traditional security aspect that we've come to expect. On that note,
Bryan, let's wrap it up. We'll include at the end of the episode here your contact information. But if you wanted to describe your practice to our audience, how would you describe it, and what sort of topics are you available to provide legal services to clients who might need it?
I focus most of my energy on Bitcoin. That for me, that's the big one. That's the one that stands to make the largest impact in the world eventually. So I focus on that. So if you're a Bitcoin company or you're in the Bitcoin space, we'd love to work with you and handle your legal needs to the extent that you have any. Hopefully you don't, but if you do, we're here. We understand Bitcoin. We're able to communicate it to the judges and the regulators because I understand it at a fundamental level. Other cryptocurrencies, always curious to see what's going on. I stay abreast of all that information as well. And if it's not something that I can handle personally, I usually have a pretty good referral network. So if you're at a loss for what to do at a certain point, I'm happy to get you to where you need to go.
All right. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and we look forward to speaking with you more in the future here on the FinCEN Report.